Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and it's time for another daily dose of Brothers War spoilers. So this spoiler season, a little weird. I was out in Vegas for Magic 30. Why? The cards were actually being spoiled. So we're doing it more set review style this set. We'll get back to the normal daily spoilers next go around. So yesterday, we talked about the white cards from the set. Today, we're moving on to blue, and we have some insane cards to talk about. There are some really good blue cards in this set. Some of my favorite cards from the whole set are blue cards, which means we should probably jump right into it and start talking about the blue cards from the Brothers War. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. Number one, to keep up on all the latest spoilers or see the full Brothers War set, head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Number two, if you need some Brothers War cards, you can get them from our awesome sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish, and even get a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes and they'll hook you up. Number three, if you want more Brothers War spoilers, make sure to check out the white video from yesterday, and tomorrow the next video will be coming up. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about the sweet blue cards from the Brothers War. First up today, we got another prototype mythic in Arcane Proxy. Wizards really going hard on the selling of proxies lately for some reason. And this card, people seem pretty hyped about it, but I'm really not seeing the hype. 7 mana for a 4/3. It's an artifact wizard, or it can be a 3 mana 2/1 artifact wizard. And then its ability is, when it enters a battlefield, if you cast it, exile or instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to its power from your graveyard, copy the card, and you can cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So if you prototype it, you can pseudo flashback a 0, 1, or 2 mana spell. If you cast it full price for 7 mana, you get all the way up to 4 mana value. So this is like Snapcaster. I don't even want to see it home because I think it's worse than at home. Snapcaster in the doghouse or something. Like, it's just a really bad Snapcaster mage. It doesn't have flash, although there are situations where it can be better at flashing back a spell than Snapcaster because you don't have to spend the mana for a spell. Let's say you prototype this and you cast a 2 mana value spell for free. That's better than Snapcaster. If you wanted to do that with Snapcaster, it would be 4 total mana. With Arcane Proxy, you're only getting it for 3 total mana. The problem is Snapcaster does that at instant speed, which is a really huge deal. Snapcaster flashing back counter spells is something you see pretty regularly with Snapcaster. Arcane Proxy, never really going to be able to do that. You got to use it at sorcery speed, which is a huge drawback. So if you want to play this card, I think you can. Like, I'm not convinced it's good, but let's say you're playing Mono Blue Delver in Standard. You got a deck with a bunch of spells. You can cast this and flash back like a Fading Hope or something. The problem is you can't really flash back your spell pierces. You can't really flash back your protection spells in response to removal. So I don't even know if that's going to do it. Or maybe you played in like Grixis just for value. In your Corpse Appraiser Grixis deck, you can cast it and flash back in a Braid or Infernal Grasp, another removal spell. That doesn't sound bad, but is it like really good? Is a 2/1, assuming you prototype it, which 7 mana is just, it's so much mana for this card. But let's say you prototype it in, you need to flash back the Braid or something. Is that gonna be worth it? Is that worth a slot in your deck? There, I'm not even sure. Although it is important to realize with all these expensive artifact cards, we are in Power Stone Standard. So if you are gonna have some Power Stones in your deck, maybe casting it for full price isn't gonna be as expensive as it looks. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this card actually being good enough to see play in Standard or in other formats, with one big exception. I think that Arcane Proxy does have a role in Modern in specific, and that is casting spells with no mana cost. Stuff like Crashing Footfalls, Glimpse of Tomorrow, Ancestral Vision. That's where I think this card can shine. Snapcaster can't flash back these spells because you can't actually cast a card that doesn't have a mana value, but Arcane Proxy kind of isn't really casting it. It's exiling it and paying it without paying its mana cost. So it gets around that weird quirk of not having a mana cost. So what I'm envisioning is maybe you're playing Rhinos in Modern, the Crashing Footfall deck, and you cascade into your Rhinos, and you make some Rhinos, and then you Arcane Proxy, and you flash back the Rhinos, and you get more Rhinos, or Glimpse of Tomorrow, or Ancestral Vision for card draw. So that's where I think Arcane Proxy can really shine, because it costs 7 mana, definitely not getting in the way of your cascade. And then once you cascade into one of your finishers, this is a pretty efficient way for just 3 mana, the same as most of your cascade spells, to reuse that spell. So that's the place that I think Arcane Proxy could potentially find a home. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't really see the hype for this card. Being sorcery speed, being a little bit expensive, I don't know. It's a flashy effect. It calls back to like Snapcaster or whatever, some really iconic cards from Magic's past, but I'm just not convinced it's actually going to be as good as people think it is. Next up, we have a random little uncommon counter spell that I think deserves a little bit more hype, and that is Defabricate. So 2-mana instant, choose one, counter target artifact or enchantment spell. If you counter that spell, you get to exile it instead of putting it in the graveyard, or counter target activated or triggered ability. So Defabricate is essentially a null plus stifle, one more mana than either one of those, but you are getting a little bit of flexibility, although I think the big calling card of this is counter an artifact or enchantment for 2 mana, and you get to exile it so it's going to be gone forever. If you think about our current standard format, countering an artifact or enchantment is actually a really big deal. In some standards, that would be a kind of useless ability, but in this standard, Fable the Mirrorbreaker, Reckoner Bankbuster, Licensed Hearse, Wedding Announcement, those are some of the best threats, some of the most played cards in the format, so being able to permanently answer any of those for 2 mana is a big deal. And then remember, we're also getting Brothers War, and Brothers War is all about dumping these massive artifacts into play. Blade, Coil Serpent, Cityscape Leveler, Phyrexian Fleshgorger, and Defabricate is a permanent answer to all of those as well. And since it exiles, that's getting rid of unearth threats like Cityscape Leveler would be unearthing eventually to come in and wreck you. Defabricate is going to get around that forever. So I actually think that in our current standard format, at worst, this has the look of a sideboard all-star. At best, it could even be worth it in the main deck. I don't know if it's worth it right now, but if we add in a bunch of artifact decks on top of the Fable the Mirrorbreakers and Wedding Announcements and the vehicles we already have in standard, then this could legitimately be a main deck card in standard. The Stifle mode, that's not really why you're playing the card, although you can get some value from it. Like, you can stifle an Unearth activation, which could be valuable. You can stifle maybe a Liliana activation or ultimate, a Planeswalker ability. If it sneaks through your counter spells, you can stifle like a AO Death Trigger or any of the other Kamigawa dragons, so you could get some value there. But really, you're playing it to deal with the artifacts and enchantments, and then every once in a while, maybe you get the Stifle mode and make that good as well. So Defabricate, why it sadly can't answer Fabricate itself, which is a bit of a flavor flail, is actually really powerful uncommon, and a card that I think has potential in standard for sure, and maybe could even sneak into some older formats as a sideboard card to hate on decks built around artifacts and enchantments. Next up, we got Drafna, founder of Lat-Nam, and I don't know if the card's good, but I absolutely love this card. One of my personal favorites from the set. So a 2-mana 2/1 human artificer advisor. It's a legendary creature. It's got 2 abilities. 1 in a blue, bounce an artifact you control back to its owner's hand, or 3 in tap to copy target artifact spell you control. So this card is just so sweet. As a 2-mana 2/1, it's fine. It's not going to be great on offense or defense, but its body is not absolutely horrible. But this can generate so much value. On level 1, you just play this in an artifact deck, you run out your artifacts. In the late game, when you got a bunch of mana, you can pick up your artifacts and copy them to get 2 instead of 1, which I guess kind of makes it a Panharmonicon in its own weird way. But I think this card can do a bunch of different things. Imagine in standard, you got a Reckoner Bankbuster, and you draw all the cards you can with it, and then it's just a silly 4/4 that's not really doing much. Well, you can use Drafna to pick it back up, recast it, get the counter, start again. Or imagine bouncing Surge Hacker Mech every turn to just repeatedly shoot down your opponent's thing, or Virus Beetle to clean out your opponent's hand, make them discard all their cards. Maybe Arcane Proxy, I know I'm not super high on it, but if you can use it every turn, that is a lot of value, and that's just the self-bounce mode. And then in the late game, like I said, once you got the mana, you can bounce your Bankbuster, and then recast it, and spend 3, and copy it and get 2, or double up your Surge Hacker Mech, or Virus Beetle, or Arcane Proxies, which does kind of make it like a weird Panharmonicon. In some ways a better Panharmonicon, because it's going to give you the actual permanence rather than just our enter the battlefield triggers. I want to build a Panharmonicon deck with Drafna. I think it would actually be pretty good. You can use it to protect the Panharmonicon, which is one of the biggest weaknesses of Panharmonicon at the moment. It just dies so much. There's so many spells that just have Destroy an Artifact kind of tacked onto them as a bonus. Really, really tough to resolve a Panharmonicon and keep it around for a while. while, but being able to bounce it back to our hand for 2 mana, that's a nice bonus. And then we just play artifacts with ETB triggers. If we can, maybe double them with Drafna and really go off with Panharmonicon. So would that be a good deck? Probably not, but I'm excited to build it. There's also some combo potential here, especially for Commander, that takes advantage of the bouncing ability. So let's say you got a Chromatic Ori, and then you got a Voltaic Key. You can tap Chromatic Ori for essentially 5 mana of any color, since it makes your mana be spent as always mana of any color. So you tap it for 5 mana of any color, then you can use Voltaic Key to untap it for a single mana. The problem is, then your Voltaic Key is tapped, so you kind of fizzle, but if you got Drafna, you can just bounce a Voltaic Key for 2 mana, replay it for 1 mana, untap it, the Chromatic Ori again for another mana, and essentially you're netting a mana in that process, so you just make infinite mana. Also works with Manifold Key, can also work with Nyx Lotus if you happen to have enough blue mana symbols on the battlefield. So there's plenty of untapped shenanigans that just let you go infinite, and if you decide to play this as your commander, you're gonna have one of your combo pieces starting in the command zone. So even though they're 3-piece combos, it's gonna be a little bit easier to set them up because you're kind of starting with one of them in hand essentially. The other thing you can do with this card in Commander, which not gonna make you any friends, but probably will win you some games, is use it with some stacks pieces. Winter Orb, Static Orb. Take Winter Orb, for example. No player may untap more than 1 land during his or her untap phase. It is a brutal card. People hate playing against it. It's one of the saltiest cards. Well, the trick here is you play Winter Orb, and you let it go around the table. None of your opponents get to untap their lands. They're only untapping 1, so it's really hurting your opponent's mana. And then, before it gets back to your turn, you just spend 2 and bounce Winter Orb back to your hand. You get to untap with all your mana, and with all that mana, you can recast your Winter Orb, do some other things, and then do the same thing. Let it go around the table before it gets back to your turn, bounce a Winter Orb. Not quite as good as locking people by tapping your Winter Orb with Urza, but still a pretty powerful and super annoying way to build around Drafna and Commander. So this card, I love it. It just oozes value. I'm excited to play in Standard, and in Modern, and in Pioneer, and Panharmonicon decks, and in Commander, but I think it's probably going to shine the most as a Commander, where it can be a very powerful combo option coming out of the command zone to make infinite mana or just stacks people out of the game. We also got Hulking Metamorph, which it's a clone. It's not a very good clone. You can prototype it for 4 mana, or you can cast it for 9 mana as a 7/7. It ETBs as a copy of any artifact or creature you control, except it essentially keeps Hulking Metamorph's power. So if you prototype it, it's going to be a 3/3. If you cast it for full price, it's going to be a 7/7. Clones that can only target your own things are a bit restrictive, probably not the best clones, although being able to hit artifacts along with creatures is a sneaky little upside. Like, this can copy a non-creature artifact and turn it into a creature, which is cool. I don't think this is going to see any competitive play, but it's a neat enough card that I wanted to mention it anyway. We also got Hurkyl is Hurkyl Master Wizard, which is a 3-mana 2/4 legendary human wizard advisor. And it says at the beginning of your end step, if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library for each card type among non-creature spells you've cast this turn. You may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand, put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. That is a lot of words, and it reads kind of confusing, but it's actually super simple. Let's say you got Hurkyl, and you cast an instant during your turn. On your end step, you get to look at your top 5 cards or reveal your top 5 cards and grab an instant. If you've cast an instant and a sorcery, then you reveal those top 5 cards, and you can take up to 1 instant, up to 1 sorcery, throw artifacts in there, enchantments in there, planeswalkers in there as well. So a pretty solid source of card advantage in decks that are built around non-creature effects, especially decks that have non-creature spells that are the same type. So as far as Standard is concerned, I think one of the biggest upsides of this card is being a 2/4. A 3-mana 2/4 actually plays pretty good defense against some of the most popular cards in the format. It blocks Tenacious Underdog, it stops a Graveyard Trespass or a Blood Tithe Harvester, so that extra point of toughness, being like a 2/4 rather than maybe a 2/3, is actually a really big deal in terms of its Standard playability, and then it doesn't seem that hard to make it work. I think the idea is you cast a Mike Stone in a Weak Stone, and you get the Thran Temporal Anchor or whatever, cast an artifact, get another artifact. I think that's what it was designed to do. value thanks to the artifact theme of the set, but really, this is probably even better grabbing spells. Like, I'm imagining in Standard, play this in like a Leer deck, and you cast to Consider and dig for a Memory Deluge, or you cast a Silver Scrutiny and you dig for a Burn Down the House. In a deck that's just full of instants and sorceries, this should be at least drawing you an extra card each turn, and if you really build around it and have a mixture of instants or sorceries, or somehow get a bunch of artifacts in there as well, this could be drawing you multiple extra cards each turn while also blocking really well, stopping your opponent's threats from beating you down. So I think that Hurkyl could actually be pretty good. I think it might even have a chance maybe in Modern. We'll have to wait and see, but I could imagine this being in some sort of spell slingery control style deck, a pretty good option that you just run it out. Its toughness is big enough that it dodges Lightning Bolt, and then you cast some spells and you draw some cards, and really, if you think about it, it's only 3 mana, so how many times do you have to hit with its ability for it to be worth it? Not that many. Like, if you block once or eat a removal spell and draw 2 cards off this, that's probably worth it for 3 mana, and as a bonus, you're getting the upside that if this just sticks out for a few turns, you're just going to drown your opponent in card advantage. So Hurkyl, I think this card's actually pretty good. Just be warned, you do got to build around it a little bit to make it work. We also got Flow of Knowledge, expensive, but in a deck with a lot of violence, can draw a ton of cards. 5 mana instant, draw a card for each island you control, then discard 2 cards. If you think about this, let's say you're Mono Blue Delver, you make 5 land drops, they're all islands, you cast this, you draw 5, discard 2. That's probably fine. As the game goes along, it could draw even more. Probably not going to be good enough for Standard at 5 mana, but if you're playing like a very island-heavy Mono Blue Commander deck, maybe some High Tide style deck, maybe this is in the conversation for one of your card draw slots. Speaking of uncommons, we also got Forging the Anchor, 3 mana sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal any number of artifact cards from among them. Put the revealed cards in your hand, the rest go on the bottom of your library. This is literally Lead the Stampede, except Lead the Stampede for artifacts. Lead the Stampede doesn't see as much play anymore, but at various points in the past, this has seen a lot of play in very creature-heavy decks. I can imagine this doing the same in artifact-heavy decks. And being artifacts, it gets even better because you can play artifact lands. So you dump a bunch of artifact lands in your deck, your Mishra's Bauble, maybe your Affinity with stuff like Mirror Enforcer. This could easily be 3 mana draw 3 or 3 mana draw 4 if you get lucky in the right shell. Some of the Affinity decks, almost all their lands are artifacts at this point. So this could literally be 3 mana draw 5 or very close to that in some decks. Does that make it better than Thought Monitor or Thoughtcast, kind of the traditional card draw spells for an Affinity deck? I don't know, but if you're playing a ton of artifacts in your deck, keep it in mind as a solid source of card advantage, or maybe this is the standard version of Thought Monitor or Thoughtcast. Maybe it doesn't make it in Modern, but maybe we get these very artifact-heavy decks. If this is hitting 3 cards and it's a draw 3 for 3, that's good enough to see a ton of play, and even drawing 2 for 3 is not the end of the world in a format like Standard. Speaking of Hurkyl, we also got Hurkyl's Final Meditation. Wow, does this spell cost a lot of mana? So 7 mana instant. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand and then end the turn, except if it's not your turn. This spell costs 3 more to cast. So essentially, you can cast it during your turn and bounce everything and end your turn for 7 mana. Or if you want to do it during your opponent's turn, which is the most powerful time to do this, it's going to be 10 mana. That is a huge, huge cost. So this is a really powerful effect. If you think about what this is, it's essentially a time stop or a discontinuity combined with Devastation Tide. So if you can cast this on your opponent's turn, it is going to be a big swing in your favor. The best timing for this is on your opponent's upkeep. Your opponent untaps for their turn. You cast this. Your opponent's going to skip their turn essentially. So they don't get to draw a card. They don't get to attack. They don't get to cast anything. And you're going to bounce everything of your opponent's and of yours, unfortunately. But you're going to bounce everything. And since the turn ends, your opponent's probably going to have to discard a bunch to hand size at the end of the turn because they got all their permanents in the hand and they can't recast them. So that is a very powerful swing. The problem is it's just so much mana. Honestly, probably too much mana to really do anything in Standard. I've seen people talk about like, oh, what if I Torrential Gearhulk this? The problem is the way this is worded. Even if you cheat this into play with Torrential Gearhulk, it's going to cost 3 more to cast it during your opponent's turn. So it's still going to be 9 total mana, 6 for the Gearhulk and then the 3 mana text for Hurkyl's Final Meditation. So it's still going to be really expensive even in that scenario. Although I guess like if you can somehow get enough mana and you like Hurkyl's Final Meditation and end your opponent's turn, and then the next turn, Torrential Gearhulk and your opponent's turn, that's probably gonna win you the game. Like that, amount of making your opponent skip their turn probably is going to lead to a victory. It's just a lot of mana. In Commander, I could see people playing this as like a weird budget Cyclonic Rift. The downside, of course, is you gotta bounce all your permanents, so Cyclonic Rift isn't even a great comparison. The power of Cyclonic Rift is you bounce all your opponent's stuff, then you untap and maybe kill someone. Hurkyl's Final Meditation is kind of just gonna annoy the entire table, and it's gonna annoy one person even more than that, because you're gonna make one of your opponents theoretically skip their turn, and they're gonna be really mad, and then everyone else has to pick up their permanents, so they're also gonna be a little mad. So I feel like this is a card that Cyclonic Rift wins games. You cast Cyclonic Rift and then you kill people and you win the game. That's why you can get away with it. Hurkyl's Final Meditation, I don't think it wins games. I think you cast this and get killed. That said, if you want to bounce everything at instant speed, there's really just not a lot of options. So maybe this could still see some Commander play, even though 10 mana is just such an absolutely massive cost. As far as Standard is concerned, I was like, ooh, this could be sweet in our World spell deck that we played not that long ago. The problem is, can you imagine casting this for 10 mana during your opponent's turn and having them make disappear it or negate it? That's a real risk. Plus, it doesn't work with World spell proper. Although, as we saw with the World spell deck, if you want to dedicate yourself to ramping, you can get enough mana to cast this. So Hurkyl's Final Meditation, my guess is against the odds card. I think this will be a funny against the odds card. We will definitely play it. I'm excited. I love End the Turn effects. They're just so unique. I'm excited to kind of do a little trolling with this card in Standard. In Commander, if you can ramp hard enough, I can see legitimate uses for it. Just be warned that since all of your permanents get bounced as well, there's a decent chance your opponents can rebuild faster than you and end up killing you as a result. We also got a little bounce spell, Machine Over Matter, 2 mana instant, bounce a non-land permanent, except it costs 1 less to cast if you control an artifact creature, and that's why I wanted to mention it. If this is 1 mana, that's as efficient as this effect gets. Like 1 mana, instant, bounce any non-land permanent, that's as good as it gets. So if you're a deck that's going to consistently have an artifact creature, and you want a bounce spell for some reason, this is the one to go with. I don't know if there's going to be a ton of demand for this effect, but it is worth keeping in mind just because of how efficient it is. We also got one of the flashiest cards from the set, one with the Multiverse, and I also love this card. And I think this one might actually be better than you think it is. So 8 mana enchantment. You can look at the top card of your library at any time. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. And then once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. So if you think about what one with the Multiverse is, it's essentially Future Sight mixed with a once per turn Omniscience. So I know, it's 8 mana. That is a huge amount of mana. When you consider that literal Future Sight is 5 mana, we have other effects like the Mystic Pizza Oven, Mystic Forge, which is 4 mana but only for artifact decks. We have the new Reconfigure Future Sight. There's a bunch of cards that let you play stuff off the top of your deck that are way, way cheaper than one with the Multiverse. So why would you ever choose to play one with the Multiverse? Well, the answer is you get to cast that free spell, and that's a huge deal. Even though this costs 8 mana, in many situations, it's going to be more efficient than a Future Sight. If you think about Future Sight, you're running out for 5 mana, you aren't going to have mana to do anything right away. So hopefully the next turn, you can take and start casting stuff and having fun. Well, with one with the Multiverse, let's say you're playing some Standard, you cast this, you can immediately for free Titan of Industry, or Toxrill, or Cityscape Leveler, or Phyrexian Fleshgorger, and if you immediately follow that up with a 7 or 8 mana spell, it's kind of like you got this effect for a single mana. Yes, you got to get up to 8 mana to get the fun started, but once you get there, that free spell really changes the math on this. And then the next turn, you get to go off. Then you get to play stuff off the top of your deck. You still get another free spell. You are going to have an absurd turn. So I actually am pretty high on this card. This is a card that I would definitely jam in the World spell deck we were playing before, and I think it would be very, very good in that deck. It's another way to cheat Titan of Industries and Toxrolls and Cityscape Levelers and to play all these big effects. Plus, it's going to generate card advantage. And in Standard, there's a bunch of ways to cheat this into play. Obviously, you can't just ramp into it. And we've seen it's not that hard to get up to 8 mana if you play a ramp deck. You could also make a bunch of treasures with Fable of the Mirror Breaker, or maybe you loot away your one with the Multiverse and then invoke Justice or Brilliant Restoration into play for much less mana than its cost. You could even try to fight rigging it into play. That might be kind of a weird build, but if you make it work, it would be really powerful. And then once you get back to Commander, There are ways to go like pseudo infinite with this card. Probably the best is Displacer Kitten, and I know Displacer Kitten, it goes infinite with everything, but the trick here is, one with the Multiverse lets you cast one spell for free each turn, but if you can blink it, it's a new one with the Multiverse, and you can cast another free spell. So what this means is, you play one with the Multiverse, you play Displacer Kitten, then you cast your free spell. Hopefully that free spell is a non-creature spell, so then you can use Displacer Kitten to blink one with the Multiverse, and then you get to cast another free spell, and if it's a non-creature spell, you do it again. If you want to guarantee it, you cast Mana Severance as one of your non-creature spells to exile all the lands from your library, and then if your deck is all non-creature spells, you literally get to play your entire deck using this process of Displacer Kitten blinking the one with the Multiverse to reset it and get another free spell, which seems kind of insane. There's also just straight up combos. Any combo that works with Future Sight, like Sensei's Divining Top, Ethereum Sculptor, any of those combos gonna work with one with the Multiverse as well. So one with the Multiverse, it looks like a janky casual card. This is one of those cards you see 8 mana and you think, oh, that's a commander card, and maybe not even a very good commander card, but I actually think this card could be sneakily strong. 8 mana means it's not going to be busted, I don't think, but I do think this card has a chance to do some spectacular things in Standard, and I expect it to be one of the fan favorite cards for commander from the set as a whole. We also got Scattered Ray, which 2 mana counters are worth mentioning. Only hits artifact or creatures, and your opponent can pay for it to get around it, but it's close enough to being playable that maybe it shows up in an Essence Scatter slot, although I don't think it's beating out Make Disappear. On the other hand, oh my god, we did get another absurd Standard card, and oh, I love this card. Skystrike Officer, 3 mana 2/3 human soldier. It is flying. Whenever it attacks, you create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, and then you can tap 3 untapped soldiers you control to draw a card. And this card, it is absurd. Everything about this card is amazing. Obviously, if Soldier Tribal is a thing, this is going to be a huge part of it. Might even be good enough to see play outside of Soldier Tribal. So let's just walk through why this card is bonkers. First off, its stats are fine. A 3 mana 2/3 flyer, that's Redain and Welcoming Vampire and Archon of Emuria. So we're starting off with a very good base, a base that you already want to play, that's already solid stats. And then, if you think about 3-drops that make tokens when they attack, Goblin, Rabblemaster, Brimaz, Squee, these are all also very playable cards, sometimes all the way back to Modern, and these cards make a token that's tapped in attacking or forced to attack, and a lot of times that's a drawback. One of the drawbacks of something like Brimaz is the token often just chump attacks into a blocker. The fact that the soldier you make is not tapped in attacking, that's a huge deal. You can store that up to use with the last mode of Skystrike Officer, which is drawing a bunch of cards, and that mode is literally Crypt Breaker, another card that has seen play at least back to Pioneer, in our world even back to Modern, another super powerful effect. So when you add all this together, 3-drop with good stats and evasion that makes tokens when it attacks and has a Crypt Breaker ability, adding all that together, that seems like an incredibly constructed playable card to me. I think in Soldier Tribal in specific, this is going to be one of the best cards in the deck. This is one of the reasons that soldiers could actually be a thing in Standard. A good body, token creation, card advantage, and even outside of dedicated Soldier Tribal, if you can get enough soldiers to like turn on that last mode of card drawing, I think this is pretty good, and maybe it can even do it by itself over the course of a few turns just by making 1/1 tokens. So Skystrike Officer, when you consider how easy it is to flood the board with soldier tokens, Resolute Reinforcements, King Darien, Torrents, Protect the Negotiators, even the counters can add soldiers to the battlefield. I feel like this card could be great in Standard, and it's got me super hyped to try to build soldiers. We also got Surge Engine, and this one was an early spoiler. We already talked about this card in a previous spoiler video because it came out like 2 months ago, so we're not going to go in depth on it, but I did want to mention 2 things about it. There's one reason it's gotten better and one reason it's gotten worse since we last talked about it. So this is a 2-drop that, for a bunch of mana, sort of levels up Figure of Destiny style. So the good news is, we're going to Power Stone Standard, and Power Stones are really good at paying for abilities. So the cost of some of these abilities, like that last one being 6 mana to draw 3 cards, probably going to be a little less than it looks, because if you got some Power Stones laying around, it can help pay for it. On the other hand, we're going into Artifact Standard, and because we're going into Artifact Standard, there's a lot of artifact hate. There's the new White Rex Age, there's Disenchant in Standard. There are tons of ways to deal with artifacts, which makes trying to level up something like this even sketchier. So I think that it probably evens itself out in the end, and it ends up being right where it was before, which is a good card, but with a lot of risk, because you got to level it up to be powerful, but if you can level it up and keep it on the battlefield, it's very, very good. So I think it lands in about the same spot, but those are a couple of things to keep in mind in Surge Engine. We also got a new Planeswalker, and it is a good one. Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. So new Teferi, 5 mana, 4 loyalty. It has a static ability where whenever you draw a card, you get a loyalty counter on it. You can pay 0 to draw a card, which is actually kind of a +1 because then it'll trigger the static to get a loyalty counter. You can pay 2 to make a 2/2 blue spirit token with vigilance, and when you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then its ultimate -12, target opponent chooses the permanent they control and returns it to their hand, and then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into their owner's library. This Teferi, it is 5 mana, but I still think this card is kind of insane. So if you think about what this is, it's 0 ability, or actually kind of a +1 because of the static. It just draws a card, and there's a long history of Planeswalkers with plus abilities that draw cards being very, very strong. Great sources of card advantage. You are adding loyalty counters and generating card advantage as you work towards the ultimate. So you got the card draw mode, and then the token it makes is actually really good too. It's like a lore scale Kodo, which is a 3 mana creature, except it's even better because it has vigilance, so you can attack and still have it back on defense. It will grow really, really quickly. Of course, if you 0 your Teferi, which is actually a +1, that'll trigger your lore scale Kodo spirit to get a counter on it and make it even bigger. But any other card draw will do it as well. And then that last mode is, I don't know, kind of like a reverse rebuke. You just bounce all of someone's things, although it's actually kind of better because most of those permanents are going to be shuffled into your opponent's library, so they can't just rebuild. They only get to keep one of them in their hand, so it's probably going to win you the game. So I think that Teferi, the reason I'm convinced this is a very strong card is just how quickly it can gain loyalty. It's gaining 2 loyalty a turn, essentially, if you 0 it, as weird as that sounds, because you're going to draw a card during your draw step, so that's +1 loyalty, and then you can 0 it to draw another card, so that's +1 loyalty. So that's kind of the base, but if you add in additional card draw effects, this can really get out of hand. So as I mentioned before, Planeswalkers with pluses that draw cards, like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, Obnixilus Reignited, Nikobo, Last Dragon God, Jace Memory of Death, even 5 mana ones, tend to see a lot of play in Standard. All these cards were somewhere between good to best card in their formats during their lives in Standard. So even at 5 mana, I think this Teferi has a shot to be really, really good. And then, as we were just talking about, this cares about any card draw, and we got ways to draw lots of cards in Standard. Maybe the easiest synergy is just Rafine. I've certainly had games against Rafine where your opponent just builds a big board and attacks and connives like 5 or something. If you have Teferi out, that's going to be adding 5 loyalty counters, or Silver Scrutiny. We played that ramp deck where we were Silver Scrutinying like X7, X8. That's going to rush Teferi essentially up to ultimate in maybe 1 turn. If you want to go really deep, you can play like Change of Fortunes and other wheel style effects. So the amount of loyalty that this is going to gain is going to make it really hard to kill with creatures. And if you can manage to get down a spirit or 2 first, they're going to get super, super huge as you're refining and Silver Scrutinying and drawing cards. So I think this has natural homes in Standard. I would not be surprised to see Esper play it in some number. The ramp deck we were playing would certainly play it. Blue's a splash color in a lot of powerful and popular decks, and it just fits right in with what decks are trying to do. Once you get back to Commander, then you got wheels for days. Like, it's certainly possible that you can windfall and get enough loyalty to just immediately ultimate Teferi. I think Wizards actually costed it intentionally, so a single Wheel of Fortune leaves you just short of ultimating. If you go Teferi, Wheel of Fortune, you're going to draw 7 cards. That's going to get you up to 11 loyalty counters without extra help. So I think they intentionally made it just not quite work. So you got to draw 1 extra card or wait 1 extra turn, but still, you can get to the ultimate really quickly. The only problem is the ultimate does only get 1 person. It's not a Cyclonic Rift. You get to choose a target opponent, not all of your opponents. So I guess you just go after whoever's the arch enemy essentially and get rid of their board, or whoever you're not friends with. Even with that drawback, this does seem like, especially in a wheel style deck, which are fairly popular in Commander, this could be one of the Planeswalkers that is actually pretty good in the format. Another comparison, and maybe this is going way too deep, but kind of reminds me a little bit of Sorin. You got the plus that draws cards, you got the negative that makes a pretty decent token, and then the ultimate that wins the game. Of course, Sorin is 1 less mana, but we've seen Sorin be a staple level Planeswalker. So all this to say, I think Teferi Temporal Pilgrim is actually legit. I think this is one of the best cards in the set, at least for standard. I think it'll show up in Commander as well. Probably not so much in like Modern or Pioneer, where you got to compete with kind of like OG Teferi Hero Dominaria. It's really hard to beat out some of the Planeswalkers we already have in those formats. But at least as far as standard is concerned, it synergizes with a lot of the best cards in the format. Its loyalty is going to make it really hard to kill. All of its abilities are strong. I think this is just a really, really good, super awesome 5-mana Planeswalker. And I will say, it doesn't feel miserable to me. The thing I like about it is it actually kills you. Unlike Teferi Hero of Dominaria or some of the other Teferis, it just kind of annoy you forever until you don't feel like playing Magic anymore in Scoop. Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, it actually has the courtesy of just like making these huge spirits and beating it down in a couple of turns. So I think it's not a miserable design, but still a very powerful card. We also got the Temporal Anchor, which, this one's a little bit jaggy. 6-mana legendary artifact. Scries 2 on your upkeep. When you scry to the bottom, you exile that many cards. And then during your turn, you can play cards that are exiled with it. So essentially, it turns your scries into draws, and it scries to itself, so you're drawing 2 extra cards each turn, although it is restricted to only playing those cards during your turn. So you can't actually use them like counter spells during your opponent's turn or whatever. I think this is just way too expensive for standard. It's too expensive and it's a little bit fragile. It's got to sit out for multiple turns to really do anything because you don't get the first scry with it until your next upkeep. So all this to say, I don't think this card has any standard potential. As much as I love drawing cards, I don't think this is going to get it done. However, there is one place where I think this card could be good, and that is in scry-themed commander decks. If you're playing like Elgith or Elminster, I think this is a nice addition. Like if the whole theme of your deck is to scry as much as possible and turn that scrying into card draw or into ramp or whatever, then I think the Temporal Anchor is a nice addition to your deck and can actually be pretty powerful. So 0 out of 10, I think, for standard, but any scry deck in specific in Commander could be a nice little upgrade. We also got Terisian Mindbreaker, a 7-mana 6/4 Juggernaut with Unearth of 4 that says when it attacks, defending player mills half of their library rounded up. So this card is kind of interesting. In general, cards like this are not very good, but there is a way that this can be a really fast kill in sub format. So the interesting part of this card is, unlike many mill half your library cards, this one actually rounds up rather than rounds down, and that is relevant because sometimes Traumatize or Lord Xander end up leaving you just short of actually killing someone with mill. But what this does, because it rounds up, is kind of guarantees you a combo kill with Burvac or with Fraying Sanity. So here's what I'm imagining. You take in early in the game, you loot your Mindbreaker into your graveyard so you can unearth it for 4 mana. On turn 3, you play a card that doubles up your mill. Fraying Sanity, Burvac, and then turn 4, you just unearth this, you attack. Mindbreaker's gonna mill half your opponent's deck, and then your Fraying Sanity or Burvac's gonna mill the other half. It's essentially a turn 4 kill that doesn't actually seem that hard to pull off. Yes, you gotta get to combat with the Mindbreaker. Yes, you gotta get it in the graveyard to unearth it because 7 mana is way too expensive. You gotta draw your Fraying Sanity or Burvac, but really, it's not that many pieces to turn this into a turn 4 combo kill. So I don't know, seems like a fun against the odds episode. Maybe in Pioneer or in Modern or something like that. If you want to add it into your mill commander deck, it's probably pretty good there as well. So I think that that's the main purpose of the card. On the other hand, played fairly, it's just not all that strong. Even with rounding up, it takes a lot of attacks to actually mill your opponent's entire deck, and you might be helping your opponent because a lot of decks have graveyard synergies. So I see this as a weird combo piece, and in that one combo, I think it's actually pretty effective. On the other hand, I wouldn't just run this as a value card. We also got another little uncommon in Thopter Mechanic, a 2-mana 2/1 human artificer. So as when you draw your second card each turn, put a counter on it, and then when it dies, you make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token. It's essentially Fairy Vandal without the flying or the flash, but you do get a Thopter when it dies. So I don't know if this will really be good enough for standard. I guess it's interesting that we do have a Fairy Vandal in standard, so maybe we can build a straight up draw 2 deck. And that's really why I wanted to mention it. If you have a deck that's built around drawing 2 cards each turn to trigger these effects, then I think this is a nice addition. Otherwise, probably not going to make it in most decks. We also got our blue command, Urza's command, and oh, this card's So 4 mana instant, you get to choose 2 of creatures you don't control, get -2, -0 until end of turn, create a tap Power Stone token, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, or scry 1 and draw a card. So this is one of the weirdest commands that I've ever seen. If you actually look through all these abilities, Hampering Snare, probably worth 1 mana. Power Stone, not even worth 1 mana. The last mode, scry 1 and draw a card. It's literally opt, which is 1 mana. So you got a bunch of these 1 mana effects that are stapled together for 4 mana. That doesn't sound great. So why do I think this card is really good? The answer is the Make a Construct mode. We have seen time and time again that those constructs, the constructs, are really, really powerful. We saw it with one of the last cards. We see it with Urza Saga. They get so big so quick in an artifact deck that I actually think pay 4 to make a construct at instant speed, even though it's tapped so it can't block, along with any of these other modes, like prevent some combat damage with the first mode, make a Power Stone that is probably pretty bad, but will at least be growing your construct, that's fine. Opting, scrying, and drawing, that's fine. So I think that's it. Like, you will never, I don't think, almost ever choose a non-construct mode. I think the Make a Construct is the base of this card, and then you get to pick which of the other 3 is best for the situation. But I think that 4 mana instant speed Make a Construct with upside, I think that's enough for this to be a very good card in standard, and I don't even think it's impossible it makes it in other formats. As we've talked about, Urza Saga busted. Card Side of Urza was insane when it was in standard. Urza Lord High Artificer, so good that it got things banned in modern, ends up being a staple in Commander. And a big reason why is that construct token that it makes, and this makes the same one. So I think that just that mode really carries this card. I will say you got to be an artifact deck. If you're not an artifact themed deck, this isn't good enough, because if you cannot grow that construct and you cannot take advantage of the construct, the other modes are all worth 1 mana or less, which is just not worth it for 4 mana, even on an instant. But if you're an artifact deck that can make a huge, 5/5, 10/10, 20/20 construct with this, then this is more than worth it, especially since you can do it at instant speed on your opponent's end step, untap with it, and smash someone to death. So Urza's command, actually think this is just a legit good card, although it's purely based on that 1 mode. If you had a 4 mana instant that just made the construct, that would almost sell me, and you get all these extra modes as a bonus as well. Finally, we got Zephyr Sentinel, which could do something. A 2 mana 2/1 flash flyer. Then when it ETBs, you bounce up to 1 other target creature you control to its owner's hand. If it was a soldier, you get a +1/+1 counter on your Zephyr Sentinel. So this is essentially a twist on Quickling, and I want to mention, just because we've seen cards like this on rare occasions show up in the past, it's a way you can save one of your creatures from a removal spell, get a flying body left over. So maybe we'll see that develop. I haven't seen Quickling in quite a while, but if you're looking for a flashy way to save your stuff, or got some synergies with creatures entering the battlefield repeatedly, Zephyr Sentinel does give us an option for that in standard, and we haven't had a card like this in standard in a minute. Finally today, we got to look at our top 3 cards for Standard, Modern, and Pioneer in Commander. So starting off at Standard, we got 3 legit all-stars here. Number 3, we just talked about it, Urza's Command. That construct, I love it. I think it's going to be really good. Number 2, Teferi, Temporal Pilgrim. I think it's a really good planeswalker. It's going to get so much loyalty, and the spirits it makes with its -2 are really legit threats. And then number 1, Skystrike Officer. It hits every mark. Yeah, it probably needs soldiers to be a real deck for it to actually have a home in standard, but if soldiers are a real deck, I think this is going to be one of the reasons why. The combination of a good body, token production, and card advantage, exactly what you want in a tribal deck. Moving back to Modern and Pioneer, again, much like we talked about with White yesterday, kind of slim picking. So number 3, we have Defabricate, which admittedly is a reach, but there's not a lot for this number 3 slot for Modern and Pioneer. I think that there's a chance this is a sideboard card. Like, we've seen a null show up in the past when the meta tends to skew towards artifact decks or maybe enchantment decks. We've seen a null show up in a format like Modern. Maybe the upside of stifling a fetch land is enough to make it worth paying 2 mana for Defabricate rather than 1 mana for something like a null. Arcane Proxy comes in at number 2. Again, like we talked about at the beginning of this video, purely because because I think flashing back stuff like Crashing Footfalls, Ancestral Visions, no mana value spells, I think that's where this card's home going to be. I don't think you want to play outside of those decks, but in those decks, I think it's really good. And then number 1, Hurkyl Master Wizard. I feel like this is a pretty good card advantage engine. We already see Mishra's Bauble artifact style decks. We see Spellslingery Storm style decks. I feel like this can slot right in there, and having that extra toughness, in Modern it means it dodges Bolt, in Pioneer it means it gets to block a lot of the aggro threats. I think when you add that together, there's got to be some deck that wants to use this as a card advantage engine in these older formats. Finally, for Commander, number 3, one with a Multiverse. I love this card. It looks super fun. Casting spells for free, playing off the top of your deck, combos everywhere. Yeah, it's 8 mana, but I don't care. You can ramp into it easily enough, and I think this card is just going to do ridiculous things. Plus, we talked about like the Displacer King combo and some of the janky ways you can go infinite with it. Number 2, Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. Rare to see a Planeswalker show up so high on our commander list, but I think that for wheel decks in specific, it's going to be so easy to get to the ultimate, and then you just essentially take the arch enemy more or less out of the game with the ultimate. I think that's going to give Teferi a home. I don't think you just jam it in any deck, but in dedicated wheel decks, I think Teferi can shine. And then number 1, and this might be my personal biases, but Drafna, founder of Lat-Nam. I love this card. It looks so fun. It's like a Panharmonicon. It copies stuff. It bounces stuff. It is just exactly my kind of value engine. So I'm planning on building an Artifact Panharmonicon deck around it. Plus, you got some of those infinite mana combos that you can just kind of incidentally slot in if you're playing Drafna as your commander. So anyway, those are the blue cards from the Brothers War. You've heard my opinion. Now give me yours. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back tomorrow with more Brothers War spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, and I will talk to you soon.